Hi there, it's your friend Phil, project management trainer and coach. We got a question from Mithun, one of our students in India, and he asked the question, what is the difference between change management and configuration management? I read through the PMBOK guide and they appear to be exactly the same thing. What is what? Well, let's talk about this today, and thank you for the question, Mithun. This is a very good question to address. As you know, the PMP exam is broken into 5 process groups. Now, out of those 5 process groups, you could have questions about changes revolving around rebaselining, replanning, executing the work, audits, and also the controlling aspect. So this is an area that we need to address. Let's talk about configuration management. When you think about configuration management, think about the management of deliverable or process specifications. In other words, specs. Think about the management of these specs that have been identified as things that the deliverable must have or should have to achieve the customer's acceptance or the stakeholders' acceptance of that final product, service, or result. So in configuration management, you are focused on the management of these specs. How do you manage these specs? One, you need to identify any items, configurable items, we call them, that need to be managed. So let's say you're coming out with a product. Are there any aspects or specs of that product that need to be closely managed, guarded, configured, whatever you want to call it? So you might identify these items on a project or in a process that needs to be configured and managed. For example, when you make an adjustment to a specification in a particular widget, that change would need to be managed through the drawings associated with that widget. So as you are updating your drawings, they need to be well versioned. And whatever has changed in those drawings also needs to be tracked and managed. And of course, these drawings must be the latest and greatest that point to what specs are in a connected deliverable, sub-deliverable, product, or even process. You have organizational processes that have certain versions that need to be tracked and managed so that you're using the correct version at the right time. So these are some of those configurable items, as the PMI calls them, that need to be identified. So after you identify what exactly you are trying to configure and manage, you go to the next step, configuration status accounting. And this is where you record the particular aspects or items that need to be configured, that need to be tracked, these specifications. And this is where you also report data regarding proposed changes to certain specs and the implementation status of those changes. So this is not involved with the management of change. In order to get this, you need to think about it as the management of specifications. So if the spec is going to change, you need to know it's going to change. You need to document that it's going to change. And then when it changes, you also need to have documentation that supports that change. You also need to report on a spec that has changed. So we call that configuration status accounting. And lastly, we have configuration verification and audit. So this ensures the proper management of configuration items, making sure that we're following the right configuration process and approach, making sure we're recording those items, making sure that the approval of the changes to those specs is being followed, and making sure that we are tracking all of these configurable items that are fluid and in motion and are changing at any point in time. So that's why we call it configuration management, because we're trying to manage how these items are recorded and tracked and the updates given and so on. So it's more about managing the specs than managing the change process. Now, it is part of the overarching ideology about managing changes because we're managing changes to specs, you see, but we're not managing the process of change itself. That comes in a different aspect called change management. Now, the word change management or change management system or change management plan should not be confused with configuration management plan or configuration management. When we talk about change management, we're talking about the management of changes. So there's a difference between managing specs versus managing changes. Managing specs has to do with managing changes to specs, but the management of changes in the world of the PMI are things like this. One, the customer asks for change. Two, ask for the change in formal writing. Three, put the change into a change log. Four, the project manager assesses the change and performs an analysis. Five, send the change request to the CCB if there is one. Six, the CCB reviews the change, analyzes the request. Seven, they approve or reject it. Eight, record the outcome of the change control board in the change log. Nine, share the change log info and outcome with stakeholders. 10. Implement approved change requests and make updates to plans or deliverables. And 11. Update with validated changes, which is an output of control quality after the approved change request review. So if we put both of these in context, we can see that they're different. One is focused on specs and processes being managed. The other is focused on changes being managed. Now, part of specs and processes being managed to make sure we're using the right version of the process or to make sure that we are aware of any update to specs, there is some element of change management, but it is not the same as change management itself, which is focusing on the changes being managed, the process of managing changes. I think where people get it mixed up a little bit is we have organizational processes that should be followed, and we have the process for change management itself. And I think people are mixing up when we say processes, right? Making sure that the processes are being configured. We're talking about organizational processes, project processes. But when we talk about change management and the word process is associated with it, we're talking about the process of managing change requests, taking them through, managing any changes to project components and things like that. So let's take a look here. On the left-hand side, we've got configuration management. It's focused on specs and processes being managed. This is where we identify and document the functional and physical characteristics of a product, result, service, or component to be tracked. This is where we control any changes to such characteristics or specs, track changes, and employ versioning as needed. This is where we record and report each change and its implementation status, and we're talking about changes to specs, okay? This is where we support the audit of the product's results or components to verify conformance to requirements. And it also includes the documentation, the tracking systems, and the defined approval levels necessary for authorizing and controlling changes again to specs. In your head, always put this is all about specification changes or changes to organizational processes and procedures, because organizational processes and procedures change and evolve, and you want to make sure that you're not using version 1.5 when you should be using version 2.8. On the other side of the screen, you see change management. This focuses on changes being managed. approving or rejecting change requests made by stakeholders to deliverables, approving or rejecting change requests made to project management plan components and baselines, change control board involvement in approving or rejecting, and also bear in mind that sometimes the project manager or sponsor may be the only approval entities if that is how the project management plan is wired. Not every project should have or does have a change control board. So bear that in mind. And also, change request outcomes should be documented in the change log. So if you look at these two, though they are related, they are focused on different things. Okay? I hope that helps. Remember, if you are looking for solid project management training and coaching, visit Praizion.com, check out our study aids and our materials, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe. It takes a lot of effort and intentionality to put out these videos, so it would be great if you could hit subscribe and like, and let us know when you kick that PMP exam out of your life. Thank you very much for your audience and look forward to talking to you again soon. Bye for now.